Today, we're looking at what's been happening in our education system and what lessons we can learn from these unprecedented times to build on and create a robust education system for all. My name's Annette Kenduff and I'm from the Institute of Public Policy and Governance at UTS. And with me I have Dr Don Carter, who is an educational specialist from UTS, along with Phil Seymour, the President of the New South Wales Primary Principals Association, and Dr Lucy Bryant, a lecturer in speech pathology at UTS. Welcome to you all. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that I am working from the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, upon whose ancestral lands our city campus at UTS also stands. I'd like to pay respect to elders, both present, past and emerging, and acknowledge them as the traditional custodians of knowledge for this land. You can see our panel on screen, and of course, please bear with us if we have any technical problems. Also, please send through your questions, and you can see there's a little Q&A button there down at the bottom of the screen. We'll have some time at the end to put them to our panel. So let's begin. There's been considerable confusion around messaging from the government and states around sending children back to school and when we will. And currently, the federal and Victorian governments are in disagreement about whether it's safe for students and teachers to return to school, as a number of other states prepare for their students to come back to class. While in New South Wales and Queensland are planning for a phased return starting next week to on-site schooling, Victoria is still holding steadfast against bringing students back, other than those from essential workers, back into the classroom. With this in mind, today we really want to focus on two things. Firstly, what does this phased return look like in schools? And secondly, what are the long-term implications of COVID-19 on our education? Don, can I start with you? I think it's really important for us all to understand terminology that's being used by our leaders. Us parents, are we really homeschooling at the moment?
And it is a very good question. And in fact, no, you're not. Homeschooling is a term that comes from the New South Wales Education Act. And homeschooling actually denotes a particular provision. You see, all school-aged children in New South Wales need to be either registered or enrolled in a registered school, or they should be registered for homeschooling. And homeschooling is parents or caregivers apply to the New South Wales Education Standards Authority with a plan for their child, a learning plan. And that plan is set up a few months in advance. And what parents or caregivers have to do is to make that submission, and then their submission is scrutinised, and there's visits to the home where the program is going to be implemented. In one of my previous roles for the New South Wales Education Standards Authority as a school inspector, homeschooling was part of my duty. So I'm well aware of the terminology, and in fact, when parents say they're homeschooling at the moment, no, their children are learning at home. So it's quite different. And if I could mention something else too, Annette, at this point, there's a lot of terms being bandied around at the moment. For example, distance learning, mobile learning, distributed learning. But in fact, what's happening is it's emergency remote teaching that's happening at the moment. And it's due to obviously to the virus, but a lot of systems, universities, schools, etc., have had to gear up very quickly for this emergency teaching situation. Perhaps further down the track, we'll be looking at a name change as such, and there'll be a greater integration of online learning. And we know that for a course to be truly online, it takes about 6 to 9 months to implement it, a lot of planning. But a lot of schools and systems, they had a week to get this ready and go online.
Yeah, Phil, you're the president of the New South Wales Principals Association. You would have seen firsthand what this is looking like in terms of the enormous work our amazing teachers and the staff around them have done to get this far. What's happening in relation to preparing around returning to school this term? Oh, Phil, have I lost you?
Gotcha. No, you're right about mute. You're right about our amazing teachers. They've done an incredible job. I've just been talking to my executive. We've been in the middle of a meeting now, talking about what they're doing in their schools and how they're preparing for next week. and it's interesting the way some schools have gone around it. We've been told, I'm talking about departmental schools, department education schools, and what we've been told is we should have no more than, say, 25% of children at the school. So schools have organised for often house groupings or alphabetical groupings, but some schools have gone out to their parent communities and said, look, is that what you want? Because often you will not get your child's class teacher. If we organise it by classes, it's better. And so some schools I know have done that and have organised their classes to come in a day a week. So it just, and what it will mean is they'll have whatever they're doing with those children, they'll also be doing for the ones who are at home at that time. So it's that
from the outside looking in, it seems like a monumental amount of things to be holding up in the air. Has there been, what's the challenges been in relation to resourcing?
Look, can I say once the Premier mentioned it was going to be consider siblings, it complicated the whole process. We had plans ready for half a class one day, half a class the next day with their class teacher. So it's been quite difficult. In terms of organisation, yes, and resources, it's been, our department stepped up and done a lot of work, putting a lot of work online into a learning hub. There's online staff meeting rooms where people of different stages and different faculties are working together and sharing ideas. Lots and lots of sharing, lots and lots of ideas, lots of scrounging for ideas, looking, what else can I do? How can I help those parents at home with these children?
I mean, there's obviously been a bit of a lot of light shown on the inequity of schools in relation to access to technology and access to resources. Schools where teachers may not have had the kind of skills and knowledge previously about accessing online education or online tools to support education. Don, you have highlighted the issues around Year 12 students and different schooling systems, but what do you think has been highlighted through this in relation to that kind of divide in our education system, the equity divide?
It's been an interesting week or so. I mean, obviously a 5-week period, but last week I wrote an article about Year 12s going back and how a lot of private schools were going to send their Year 12s back pretty well immediately to get them ready for the HSC, but government schools weren't sending their Year 12s back, which to me was a curious decision given that we've built the HSC up into this huge monolithic stress-ridden structure, and we've been telling children for decades how important it is, and yet some Year 12s are going back, but not others. This is a crucial time for Year 12, and this becomes not only an educational issue, it's an equity issue. Education is relational. Students learn best when they're mixing with their teachers and their peers, when they're tossing ideas around, when they're refining and consolidating knowledge, when they're working out what their point of view is on a particular issue or content point, for example. So to say that some Year 12s are going back for face-to-face lessons, but not others, is a really curious and potentially damaging situation. Hopefully that will be rectified, and soon. As we move through term 2, students are going to be working towards their trial exams, and then of course the big exam, which NESA, the Standards Authority, has advised the exams are going ahead. So I'd like to see Year 12s back in a face-to-face situation. We've been told consistently by the government that schools are safe places. I certainly hope they're safe places for school staff, let alone children.
Lucy, you're at the other end, often working with really young children in relation to this. What can you tell us about the implications or around language and speech development and how you've been utilising telehealth?
Yeah, so I'm, as a speech pathologist, working with a whole range of different children with communication and swallowing disorders. So for communication in particular, we work with young kids and with kids throughout their school ages with difficulties with speech sounds, with understanding language when they're spoken to and when they're reading, for expressing ideas when they're speaking and writing, their literacy, body language, social interaction, with problems with voice, with stuttering. So there's a whole range of different children that we're supporting within the school system. Estimates of how many kids really varies, and there was a national inquiry last year about how many children speech pathologists are supporting. Estimates are around 20% of children in our school system. So we're looking at around 6 kids per classroom, or up to around 400,000 kids in New South Wales alone. So those children, really, when they're not at school, many of them are receiving their services at school, which can be a little bit difficult. So there's had to be a really rapid transition to provide services online using telehealth. Telehealth has been around for years. There's a lot of evidence to support it. And at UTS, we operate a telepractice clinic and have, since our clinical program commenced last year. So we've really played a role in supporting lots of different allied health professionals all across the globe in transforming to telehealth to support students. And that means using video calls rather than face-to-face sessions. And a lot of the kids are still getting those supports and those services. And that's really helpful in keeping them moving forward in their development. Some of these kids need a little bit more support to keep up with their peers. And if they're not getting that support, they're not going to continue moving forward at the same rate. They're not necessarily going to fall back. That gap may widen if they're not moving forward quite as much.
And so as a positive, is one of the positives that might come out of this is that there's just been such a broad uptake of telehealth across a whole lot of allied health and medical health programs. Do you think that might be a positive that comes out of this in terms of people understanding that telehealth is actually a good way to provide services, particularly to regional and remote communities perhaps?
Absolutely. There's been a really rapid upskilling of all sorts of different health professionals in how to deliver their services online. We've certainly been running webinars, and we've educated hundreds and hundreds of speech pathologists and allied health professionals all across the world in how to deliver online services. There's been rapid changes in policies and procedures, in the funding models that health professionals are able to access to deliver their health services online. And so all of these barriers that we were seeing even 6 months ago are suddenly being overcome. And that's likely to remain in place long term, which means that the health professionals that are city-based are able to access those children that are in more rural and remote areas to provide services. Of course, there's still some difficulties in internet access, and we do see a little bit of inequity there. But the more we're learning, the more we're able to overcome those barriers, and potentially long term, this is going to see a really big benefit for some children that just didn't have access to these services previously. The city speech pathologists and occupational therapists are going to be able to link into schools to provide those services to kids that might not have had them otherwise. And that's really going to help support their education long term.
And so, Dom, what about for you? What do you see as the potential systems changes in education as a result of the lockdown? I mean, we've had some really big statements, NAPLANs not going ahead. What do you see in terms of system changes and potential positives coming out of this for the education system and the people service?
The advent of this crisis, this health crisis, coincides with a New South Wales curriculum review, and I would imagine the curriculum review will need to attend to what's happened during the coronavirus crisis. And make provisions for a type of learning that is perhaps taking more into account remote learning or online learning. However, it's also an opportunity to reset the curriculum insofar as look to see where our emphases are. Currently, the last decade or so, we've had a real emphasis on literacy and numeracy, particularly with the advent of NAPLAN. And whilst no one would deny that literacy and numeracy skills are important and we need to produce students who are highly literate and highly numerate, we also need to remember that for a lot of our children in schools, they achieve not only in academic subjects or academically, but there are a range of other types of pursuits, for example, in the creative and performing arts. So I would like to see a reset on the curriculum emphases and like to see a greater emphasis given to those areas of the curriculum that have been marginalised over the last decade or so, in particular the creative arts. I think this is also a good opportunity for a stronger partnership with parents. It's my hope that over the last 5 weeks, that with parents engaging with their child's learning, that they've engaged with the curriculum and that they've got, first of all, a better appreciation of what teachers do, but a better understanding of what teachers do and a better understanding of the curriculum. And with a better understanding of the curriculum, the input from parents in their child's learning becomes even more important and stronger and stands to benefit the school within that partnership as well. And perhaps it will lead to parents generally being able to critique in a very specific way what's happening in education, and perhaps to look at, say, the role of externally imposed requirements such as NAPLAN and ask the question, do we need this externally imposed test when in fact New South Wales curriculum is imbued with literacy and numeracy skills, so that when teachers teach the content, they are teaching those skills. And in the early years of learning, that's done explicitly. So that's what I would like to see in that.
And what about you, Phil? You're on the front line, I'm sure, of the NAPLAN discussion. Where do you see this in relation to having this big shift this year? It was very quick. We don't need NAPLAN this year. It was a very clear and early decision. What do you reckon it says?
NAPLAN isn't going away anytime soon. It will certainly change the way it is. One of the positives with it is the adaptive nature of it. So we'll be able to assess children at different levels, not have that artificial ceiling that it has now. Hopefully it gets back to its diagnostic feature that I think was very supportive of teachers in the classroom, and you might actually get it back in time to do any good for you, rather than waiting 4 or 5 months for any results to come back. But that being aside, I think, like Don, the systems change that I'm really more happy about is the curriculum review by Jeff Masters, and hoping that there is a, what's the word, shedding of some of the really dense content that we have in it to a more lighter focus, but then a better focus on the general capabilities that, collaboration, critical thinking, those sorts of things that I think are much, much more important. And I think parents at home will be sitting there saying, why are kids doing this stuff? They're looking at it now. There are more things in life. There are better things. There are other skills I want my child to have. So as Don was saying, I'm hoping that they click into that and become more involved in their school and say, this is the sort of work we should be doing. This is what really my child wants to be able to do when they leave school.
Yeah, so we know that parents have a huge impact in terms of the outcomes for kids in terms of education. And I mean, I've been hands, neck deep in education with my fellow at home. I wonder about whether it's making us think more broadly. I mean, there's been big conversations going on for a while about the aims or the purpose of education. And do you think that there is potential that the fact that this has been such a dramatic, such an agile kind of change, do you think there is potential that we'll rethink some of that aims and purpose of education more broadly, that'll open up a bigger conversation?
I certainly hope so. I was disappointed probably before the COVID experience that we had the Prime Minister and the Premier and other politicians saying, let's get back to the basics. Let's look at, the PISA results and we're falling behind. We think, hang on, are they really testing what we think is important anyway?
Yeah.
So we really need to go back and say, as I think the Uluru statement is, the Alice Springs statement, is trying to say that this is the purpose of education. This is what we should be aiming at. Therefore, let's backward map and see how we're getting there. What strategies are we doing? What are we teaching to get kids to be the way we want them?
Do you think some of the things that schools have learned and have gained from being more engaged online or having access to different resources that they might not have had before, do you think they'll stay the course? Do you think there'll be things that will stay in now, or do you think it'll kind of quickly shift back to a more true?
Well, I think in terms of differentiating what you're teaching in the classroom, it's a great asset to be able to tap into for something. some of our teachers may not have been on the front foot in terms of IT and use of it, and have had their eyes really opened up to lots of things. So I think there's, and I'm an optimist, I think potential that teachers have seen and said, this will make it easier for me to cater for the range of abilities I have in my classroom. Yeah. I might be able to do this, do that, whatever. But it's still as a resource. It can't be the be all end all.
And so, Lucy, with students like the ones you're working with, and with other students who may experience other types of disadvantages, whether it's economic disadvantage or access to services, do you think that there's an opportunity here to utilise the sorts of resources that have been developed differently in schools?
Absolutely. The development of different resources to be able to facilitate more remote learning could certainly be translated to support more remote support for language and other skills that allied health services provide. We're building those capacities within the educators, within parents, and within the health providers as well, to be able to deliver services remotely. And if we're able to hold on to that long term and to utilise that rapid skill development, we can certainly provide services to more people at a larger scale, and utilise all of those different stakeholders to be able to have the best outcomes.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really conscious that we're going back to a shift. We're having a change, go back to school again, but it's not the same as it was, because it's only 1 day a week, or for some kids, or for other kids it'll be more, or some will be not being supervised by their classroom teacher. So there's more shift ahead. What do you think about that parents should be doing to talk to their kids or engage with their kids about this next change, this next shift? And it's not even that we know that it'll be, I mean, obviously we all started term 2 thinking we were all going to be online for the whole term. It's changed already, and we're only just into term 2. So what do you think the kind of conversations that parents should be having with their kids about what this means?
Change is hard for kids. It can be really difficult to change from those routines that we're used to. And school is such a big routine. It's getting up 5 days a week and going to a certain place with a certain group of people, and there's expectations that a child develops around that. And so shifts in that routine can be really upsetting. They can sometimes lead children to behave in a way that's a little bit different to what we expect, and that's entirely normal as well, because it's harder to communicate what those changes are and how they're feeling because of those changes. And so it's really important that we continue to have a conversation with our kids around what's happening and why it's happening, so that they have the knowledge and the language to be able to express how they're feeling and to know what's coming. So really, parents should be, as much as possible, talking to their kids about COVID-19 and what it is and what it means. And there's some really lovely children's books that have come out to be able to support parents in doing that. And many of those are available online. So we can talk to our kids about physical distancing and what that is and what that means, because it's a term they're hearing quite a lot. We can let our children know that school is returning and that it's going to look a little bit different, and tell them what that means and what it's going to look like. For kids that have a little bit more trouble with understanding, visuals and picture supports can be really helpful, which is why those picture books are quite nice. But also just coming up with a bit of a timetable to show them what their school day is going to look like, so that they know what to expect. If children understand what's coming and they have the language to be able to explain what's happening and why, then they're likely to be able to cope a lot better.
I've got a question from Simon. She's been saying, what can the Department of Education and universities do to ensure they're really taking that blended learning to the next level? Do you have some thoughts on that, Phil?
Well, I think what we'll have to do is keep at it, keep on it, keep going. We're having a lot more in this next couple of, probably to the end of term. What we've sort of been asked to arrange for a day of professional learning in the middle of the 5 days, and in that time there's opportunity to learn to do professional learning on the use of some of this equipment and tools and software packages and whatever's being around. I think that's an opportunity, so they can do it. I mean, I think I'm hopeful that they've got that taste of what this is like, and they should be able to say, all right, I'll now be able to do this and change. Because one of the other questions there talks about, you know, catering for the range of children in your classrooms, and something like this is going to twig with some teachers and say, I can do this, I can change things. So if they're looking at their pedagogy and their practice, I think we'll do that. We might just have to nudge a bit more, that's all.
What about entrance to university, entrance requirements to university? Do people have thoughts on that in terms of Year 12 and ATAR and the admissions for the 2020 cohort? Maybe John, do you have anything? I'll start with you.
Yes, I think that's a perennial question, and it's in the forefront of a lot of people's minds, the entry into teacher education programs in universities. At a previous university where I worked, the Vice-Chancellor used to say it's not so much the quality of the candidate when they enter, it's the quality of the graduate when they graduate. And sometimes people don't consider the quality of the graduate when they leave. It's about what they're like when they come in. But it is the case that we certainly want bright, enthusiastic entrants into initial teacher education who do have a commitment to education and the education of children, obviously, but who are able to get through those initial steps. And as you know, they've got to satisfy the ATAR, 3 Band 5s, including English, but not EALD, and submit a personal statement as well. But what is perhaps not as well known is during the course of their initial teacher education degree, there are a number of other hurdles. For example, they have to pass the literacy and numeracy test. It's called Lantite. They have to do the teaching performance assessment, which is a national requirement. If they want to teach in a New South Wales government school, they've got to satisfy the teacher success profile. And that means going for an interview, a psychometric test, and a few other requirements. So whilst the debate is sometimes oversimplified to ATARs are too low, there's much more to it. And in fact, teaching and teachers are one of the most scrutinised professions that we could ever talk about.
What about in relation to the kind of access to technology during this period? You know, we'll have areas of the population, groups from the population who won't have had the same sorts of access to technology or support from their teachers, sometimes based on what the system can provide, and sometimes from, you know, where they are with their families. Do you have any thoughts about that in relation to what those inequities, how that will play out in terms of results, or how we think universities might take that into consideration?
I think universities, for all of the compliance that universities have to engage with, are very much open to and flexible about offering students places and supporting students once they're in a particular course. At the moment, it isn't a level playing field out there for school students. For example, a teacher I know can only communicate with her students via email or the phone. In one way, that's good because it's his one-on-one attention, but at the same time, she's got a number of classes, and if you've got 5 classes of 30 students, I mean, that's a lot of phone calls, that's a lot of emails, and that does cause, it's time consuming, obviously, and I would imagine that she'd be worried about how they're going to come out of this. So we've got to understand that when students apply for universities, they're coming from different contexts, etc. That's why there are different types of scholarships and funding arrangements. And it's really a case-by-case assessment of applications when those applications don't come from the, if I can put it this way, from the standard cohort, the standard features of the cohort.
I mean, Lucy, one of the questions that's there from one of the participants, and also somebody who's listening in today, and one of the questions I had was in relation to students who may have speech and language delays or other special needs, and what the implication of kind of being not being able to continue their programs of support during this period. What will it be like what do we think will be the outcomes for those kids returning to school? And also one of the questions somebody's asked here is should the government be funding speech therapists in schools? Do you have some thoughts on that?
So language, speech and language and communication really underlie everything that a child does at school. It's not just about English and text studies and that kind of thing. It's about being able to understand the language that we use to describe scientific concepts, to do word problems in mathematics. It's in every subject. So it's really important that these kids that have special needs and communication disorders have continued support. Many kids have been able to continue accessing that with the number of therapists that have been able to provide telehealth services. For those that haven't had continued access, then they may not be able to continue practicing what they've been doing in their therapy sessions. Many therapists have provided resources for kids to continue practicing at home with their parents, but again, maybe they won't be receiving exactly the same thing that they did. So maybe they're just not moving forward at the same rate that their peers would, but they're not going to fall backwards at all. Certainly for some children, we're not going to see it's going to be a real benefit for them to have been home in this period. The slower pace of life with lockdown and with our physical distancing means we're at home more. There's more time for interaction between kids and their parents and between kids and their siblings as well. And interaction is key to language development. Language develops with interaction. So that's not staring at a TV, staring at an iPad application, it's conversation. Kids, because they're spending more time with their siblings, are having to negotiate, they're having to share, resolve arguments. Parents have more time over breakfast because you're not rushing to get ready and get the kids to school and get yourself to work. So there's a little bit more time for that conversation. And that can really help a lot of kids to develop their language skills. So we may actually see some benefits for some children in having more time to interact with other members of their family.
It looked like you had some thoughts on that, Phil, in relation to allied health therapists in schools.
Oh, yes, I absolutely do. And just a comment from Lucy then, often though, some of our families don't have that rich language background. And when some of our kindergarten children come to school, they may have a very limited vocabulary because of those experiences. So, one of the big things in kindergarten that we do is talk, give them those models, give them the conversations, which is really important. So coming back to allied health, absolutely. I've been in, principal for 22 years, been 44 years in teaching. The need for OT and speeches in schools is really, really important. I've been lucky in some schools that we've actually been able to get a speech therapist come in one day a week, use one of our offices and have those children in there regularly because they need it and couldn't get out to them, in different schools I've been in. So it's really important. But what I think has happened is the Gonski funding that's arrived in schools, especially our low ESS schools with equity issues. I don't know many of them that have not employed a speech therapist or an occupational therapist to come in regularly into schools, be part of the staff, get to know those children, and then even better, work with individual children, but giving really good advice to the teachers. These are some of the things you could be doing to help kids organise themselves, for example, as an OT will do for you. And the speech is giving them, they're there, they can see what's happening, they can give teachers, this child needs a little bit more of this, a little bit more of that, blah, blah, blah. And in general, what you do in your classroom. I think that work would be absolutely fabulous in schools.
And I have to agree with Phil on that in terms of being able to provide those services in schools, and that locally determined funding through Gonski is something that a lot of schools are using to access speech pathologists. And I think with telehealth, where those speech pathologists maybe aren't close by and there isn't the service, there isn't the ability to access them, telehealth is really going to give those schools the ability to link in a therapist from a distance. So they're not having to pay a therapist to travel 50 or more kilometres to their school to be able to provide that service. I think the issue comes in when sometimes the funding there is only going to support a therapist 1 day a week. And when you're looking at around 6 kids per classroom that have difficulty, there's just not enough time in the day to see them all. And that's where some of the difficulties can come in, where younger kids are prioritised and older kids are missing out.
And so, Don, what do you reckon we should be doing as universities to support a new, better, all-improved, fabulous post-COVID education system?
What I'd like to see is building on what we're currently doing, and that is partnerships with schools. Now, UTS have a number of very positive partnerships with schools, primary and high schools. I'd like to see that consolidated and, in fact, new partnerships developed. There needs to be an exchange of ideas between schools and universities, and exchange of personnel. We love to get primary and high school teachers in at UTS to talk to our students, people who are actually in the classroom at the moment, who are really in touch with what's going on. But also, we like going into schools and researching what's happening in schools. It's got to be that partnership, and it's got to be strengthened. Just recently, we conducted a survey with New South Wales primary schools about proposals to our undergraduate degree for primary teaching, and we got an immensely positive response from those primary schools. 63 schools within 48 hours responded about our proposed plans, and what we're hoping to do is to work more closely with those schools. So that's to me one of the most important things, is that close connection, the dialogue, the co-working, the collaboration. But we want to get more teachers in at UTS to work with our students.
What do you think, Phil? What would you like to see universities doing?
Absolutely. Look, I was the principal of a demonstration school in Wollongong for 8 years, worked very closely with University of Wollongong and their graduates coming in and working in schools. I really, that exchange of ideas is absolutely spot on. We need to do that. To have really current teachers who are on top of their game, working closely with universities and sharing with our undergrads would be fabulous. Action research, some of those, and really driving practice, looking at best practice, sharing if universities are doing some of the research, they can share with teachers and say, oh, this is a better way of doing this, or I think that's a really crucial thing to be doing, and I would support it strongly.
And so, this is my tough question. What does success look like? How will we know that we've managed this successfully? I did tell you I was going to ask you that question. You've had time to think about it. What do you think, Phil? What does success look like when we come out the other side of this and everybody's back at school? What does it look like?
Look, I think success will look like the teachers will have assessed the children to see where they're at, develop plans to say, over this time, I think they've drifted off a little here. I need to pull them back into line. I need to sort out their goals or where they're going with them. And I think to get us on track, because the worry, if you've had a great fun and some practical stuff at home, cooking and working in the yard or all those sorts of things, you're still learning. So let's see if the academic learning needs a bit of a top up. I think I'd like to see a closer relationship between families and schools, because I think that'd be spot on. So they now got a lot. I'm hoping parents will say, I know why they need some holidays. I know why they need the break. I understand what the pressure is. I only had 2 at home or 3 at home, and I know what it's like. So probably a greater appreciation of the role of teachers. So that partnership and appreciation, and I guess knowing where the kids are at and developing plans to get going. So they're not missing out, not lagging.
Mm-hmm. Don, what about you?
I certainly agree with all Phil has said, particularly the partnerships I've talked about the partnerships between schools and universities. I've talked about the importance of parents as well. So I'm certainly hoping that parents and schools will be closer, and that parents have gained a clearer understanding of education. But one other thing I'd add is that for school sectors and universities, that there will be they will each have a very clear set of procedures ready to enact in case there is another pandemic, because from everything I'm reading, this is going to be not an isolated occurrence. We can expect more. So we need to make sure that it's not in the future emergency remote teaching. We slip into a different gear and that it's done smoothly because the contingency plans have been put in place.
What about you, Lucy?
I think we've had a lot of changes in the way that services are delivered in the last month with this pandemic. There's been a lot of changes in policy in terms of being able to allow health professionals and schools and families to get online and to deliver services. The technology's developed a long way. The providers of technology have had to improve their service delivery and their security. We've had changes in government policy and funding and upskilling of so many different people to be able to go online. So I'm hoping that we can take that ability long term and not see it as something that was just associated with this emergency remote method of working. And we can take that forward to the benefit of people that don't always have access to the services and the facilities that we have in cities. We're able to use that new technological competence to provide greater equity to kids in rural and remote areas, to schools and to families, so that they have those services longer term.
Great. We've got a couple of questions from the attendees, so I'll just start working my way through those. Do you think, do teachers need additional training to get up to speed on technological requirements? And what resources are DET providing? Maybe Phil, can you answer that one?
Yeah, look, I do think teachers need additional work, and I think it's been possibly been a great opportunity for younger teachers to lead the way there. So I think it's a nice thing to have happened. But as we know, you have to be able to use it. You don't just learn it and then let it go. You've got to learn it and work on it and develop your own skills in it yourself. The department's been, just thinking of what Don was saying earlier, I got a message yesterday saying that with year 11 and 12 students have been, those who didn't have computers have been sent dongles and computers. Bang. We've exhausted the supply in Australia. Some of the universities beat us to it. So, because the concern I had was the inequity in primary schools where some families didn't have it. Now, we were told on Friday that they won't get it this term. We won't get those. However, I've been told there is a guarantee that they will get it as soon as they can get hold of the supplies. Yeah. So we've got to get, once we get it, we've got to use it. So yeah. I think teachers will see.
That technological divide, that this has really shined a bright light on what some people have been saying for a while, but a really kind of very big consciousness across the community, I think, about the technological divide in terms of equity.
Yes. Yeah.
People being able to access, whether it's being able to access the internet or whether it's being able to access a computer in a particular family or whatever the circumstances are, that technology and access to technology is really, become really conscious of it, haven't we?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, Don, have you got anything that you think in terms of what will change in relation to education for students who are coming in as teachers, like teacher education in relation to these times? Do you think there's things that we might take forward in the teaching programs itself that will change as a result?
Obviously, there's going to be a heavier emphasis, I'd say, on online learning and a shift away from that emergency remote teaching mindset to a smoother and more comprehensive integration of learning online and digital platforms. And it's going to be the case that university academics are going to have to be on top of developments in digital technology and how they can be used in not only delivering their courses, but training their pre-service teachers to implement and use those platforms within the classroom. A lot of schools are doing that now, but as we know, the world of technology is changing on a daily basis. So for teacher education, academics are going to have to be really staying on top of that, but not using it in the gimmicky sense, but using them purposefully in their classes so that their students can use them purposefully in the classroom. And that's where we need to consolidate that teacher or with the university school partnership as well, so that university academics know what's happening in schools and schools know what's happening in pre-service teacher education.
So I'm walking away with the idea that we're going to end up with teachers who have got more technological skills, parents who are more engaged in education, language and communication development acknowledged as a kind of broad skill and capability, a bigger focus on capabilities. It's going to be amazing, this new education system. It's going to be fantastic.
Great.
Has anybody got any last points that they want to make just before we close?
Can I say, Annette, you raised the aims of education before, and I'd just like to pick up on that very briefly, insofar as during this pandemic, I've not heard any politician or bureaucrat talk about the aims of education. And in fact, in most education debates, that's not even raised. We talk about student performance, we talk about test results, etc., but we don't go back and talk about what are the aims, what are the purposes of education. Now, if we start to do that, well, then that will help guide the decisions we make. And that sort of discussion, I believe, would have helped the decision making about a return to school. What are the aims of education? What do we prioritise? Therefore, these are the things that should happen first. So I just add that.
Yeah, and I mean the other
purpose. Exactly.
Sorry, back to the purpose. Yeah, sorry.
Yep.
I mean the other thing that I would add is that kind of quite kind of heartbreaking, as a person who's been involved in education for a long time, the heartbreaking part of this for me has been the ways in which teachers have simultaneously been incredibly acknowledged by, I think, parents and the broader community, but not necessarily their professionalism, not really necessarily acknowledged in ways that I think is particularly empowering or of the kind of skill and incredible dedication that our teachers bring to their work. There's been a lot of talk as if teachers are it's basically about providing childcare for essential workers, and the staff, also the other staff who are engaged in education who aren't teachers. I think that's been that divide's been really clear in terms of the public conversation. Yeah. All right, well, we'll wrap up the discussion there, and thank you to Lucy and Don and Phil for participating. And if you are interested in pursuing a change in education or advancing your career into education, UTS is running a series of postgraduate information sessions online in just over 2 weeks' time. And so if you'd like to check out that website, it's pg.uts.edu.au. We're planning more events in the Life After Lockdown series, so keep an eye out for the next email. This webinar will be posted on YouTube soon, and we look forward to seeing you at our next event. Thanks very much.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.